The tennis world is absolutely reeling right now, and if you haven't heard the news yet, you better sit down for this one. Aryna Sabalenka, the world number one and the woman who just battled her heart out in the Australian Open final, has officially pulled the plug on the Qatar Open. But here's the kicker that nobody's talking about. She's not the only one running for the hills. This isn't just one player making a tough decision about her schedule. This is a full-blown exodus, a mass abandonment, a tournament implosion of epic proportions. The Qatar Open is basically disintegrating before our eyes, and what we're witnessing right now could change everything about how the WTA operates for years to come. Let me paint you the full picture of this absolute chaos, because when you see the complete list of names dropping out of this tournament, your jaw's going to hit the floor. Sabalenka makes the headlines because she's the biggest name, the defending world number one who won this very tournament back in 2020 when she was still establishing herself as a future champion. But she's just the tip of the iceberg. Jessica Pegula, currently ranked world number 6 and one of the most consistent performers on tour, decided she'd rather be literally anywhere else than Doha. Naomi Osaka, the four-time Grand Slam champion, who's been trying to work her way back to peak form, took one look at the Middle East swing and said, "No thank you to the entire thing." Madison Keys withdrew. Barbara Krejcikova is out. The injury list keeps expanding with players like Marketa Vondrousova stepping away to recover from various ailments. Even Leylah Fernandez, who tennis fans were excited to see this season, hasn't even started her 2025 campaign yet. Are you starting to see the problem here? This isn't a normal situation where one or two players have legitimate injuries and have to make tough choices. This is systematic. This is strategic. This is half the women's tour looking at the Qatar Open and collectively deciding it's not worth their time, energy, or bodies. The tournament organizers in Doha must be absolutely losing their minds right now. They promoted this event with the promise of world-class tennis featuring the biggest names in the women's game. They sold tickets months in advance to fans who wanted to see Sabalenka, Pegula, Osaka, and all these incredible athletes compete at the highest level. They secured sponsorships and television deals based on the star power that was supposed to light up their courts. And now, what do they have? A tournament so depleted that they're scrambling to fill the main draw with players who were originally supposed to be grinding through qualifying rounds just to get in. Let that sink in for a moment. The Qatar Open, a premier-level WTA event that's supposed to showcase elite tennis, is now giving main draw spots to players like Alexandra Eala, Emiliana Arango, Daria Kasatkina, Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, and Kristina Butsa, not because these players earned their way through qualifying, but because there's literally nobody else to fill the spots. The seats that were reserved for the top players in the world are now occupied by athletes who, while talented, were never meant to be the headliners of this event. That's not a knock on these players at all. They're professional tennis players competing at an incredibly high level. But this isn't how a marquee WTA tournament is supposed to function. You don't build a premier event by plugging holes in your lineup because everyone you actually wanted decided to skip town. The domino effect here is fascinating to watch, and it all starts with understanding what Sabalenka just went through in Melbourne. The Australian Open final against Elena Rybakina wasn't just another match. It was a brutal, emotionally devastating battle that left Sabalenka absolutely shattered. And here's what makes this so interesting. Sabalenka didn't try to hide it. In her post-match press conference, she was shockingly honest about how she was feeling, and her transparency gives us a rare window into the mental and physical toll that elite tennis actually takes on these athletes. When asked about her performance, Sabalenka didn't give the standard corporate athlete response. She didn't say she gave it her all and she's proud of her effort, and she'll learn from this and come back stronger next time. Instead, she said something far more human and far more revealing. She admitted that Rybakina played an incredible match, and that she tried her absolute best, but it simply wasn't enough. She acknowledged that she had opportunities and feels like she missed a couple, but then she shrugged and said, "That's just tennis. One day you're the loser, the next day you're the winner." And then came the line that should tell you everything about her mindset. "Hopefully I'll be more of a winner this season than a loser. Hoping right now and praying." Let's pause right there because that statement is absolutely loaded. This is the world number one, a woman who has won multiple Grand Slam titles and dominated the tour for years, And she's literally saying she hopes and prays she wins more than she loses this year. That's not the confident champion talk you typically hear from elite athletes. That's someone who just had her heart ripped out in a Grand Slam final and is trying to piece herself back together while cameras are pointed at her face. That's vulnerability. That's honesty. That's what actually happens when you pour everything you have into a tournament for 2 weeks, make it all the way to the final, and come up just short. The journalist pushed further, asking Sabalenka when she planned to review her Australian Open performance with her team. Her response was even more illuminating. She said she wasn't sure when she'd be ready to watch the matches back and joked with her agent about it, saying maybe in a week or maybe in a few days, whenever she feels like she can actually move on from this loss. Then she described her current emotional state as a combination of laughing and crying, calling it a hysterical moment that wasn't really productive. She was just letting everything out, releasing all the frustration and disappointment and anger that had been building up. She admitted she was upset with herself because once again she felt like she had opportunities but couldn't maintain her level when Rybakina cranked up the aggression. But then, in a moment of self-awareness, she caught herself and acknowledged that overall she played great tennis in Australia, even in the final, and that she did her absolute best. Rybakina was simply the better player that day. Simple as that. But here's the part that really shows you what elite athletes go through behind the scenes. The part that the cameras don't capture and the highlight reels don't show. Sabalenka said, "We'll speak with the team, how they try to avoid me because it's not really healthy to be around me right now." Think about that statement for a second. She's literally warning people that she's in such a toxic headspace after this loss that her own team, the people who are paid to support her and help her through difficult moments, are actively trying to stay away from her because being around her is psychologically draining. That level of transparency is almost unheard of in professional tennis. Most players protect their image carefully, offering sanitized versions of their emotions that fit neatly into the narrative of the resilient champion who always bounces back. Sabalenka is out here telling the world that she's crying, laughing hysterically, and that she's so unbearable to be around that her team is giving her space because they can't handle her current energy. This is real. This is what actually happens when you dedicate your entire life to a sport, fight your way through 2 brutal weeks of matches at a Grand Slam, and fall just short in the final. You don't just immediately flip a switch and become ready to compete again a week later. You're mentally destroyed. You're physically exhausted. You need time to process the grief, the disappointment, the what-ifs that keep replaying in your mind. You need space to be human, to feel your feelings, to let yourself be devastated before you can start rebuilding. So when you look at Sabalenka's withdrawal from Qatar through this lens, it suddenly makes perfect sense. The woman is emotionally wrecked and physically drained after Melbourne. She needs time to get her head right before she steps back on a tennis court. Playing another high-level tournament just days after experiencing that kind of emotional trauma would be professional malpractice. She'd show up unprepared, probably lose early, and dig herself into an even deeper mental hole that would take weeks or months to climb out of. Taking a strategic break to recover isn't weakness. It's smart management of a long career. But here's where things get interesting, and here's where the strategic calculations start to become obvious. It's awfully convenient that Sabalenka is only pulling out of a tournament where she's not defending significant ranking points and where she hasn't performed particularly well in recent years. Her best result at the Qatar Open was winning it back in 2020, but her performances since then have been underwhelming at best. She's not losing much in the rankings by skipping this event. In fact, she might actually be protecting her ranking by resting up and coming back strong for bigger tournaments later in the season, where she has more points to defend. Now, I'm not saying Sabalenka is faking her emotional exhaustion or making up her need for rest. Mental health and burnout are absolutely real issues in professional sports, and anyone who's watched her career knows she's dealt with psychological struggles on court before. But it's also true that players at this level are getting increasingly strategic about which tournaments they play and which ones they skip. The WTA calendar is absolutely brutal, packed with mandatory events and premier tournaments that all demand peak performance. You physically cannot play everything at full intensity without breaking down, so players have to pick and choose. They prioritize the events that matter most for their ranking, their prize money, their sponsorship obligations, and their legacy. Everything else becomes negotiable. The Qatar Open clearly falls into that negotiable category for a lot of players this year. When you consider the timing coming just days after the Australian Open with no real recovery window, the location requiring extensive travel to the Middle East, and the fact that it falls right before Dubai, which is a bigger and more prestigious WTA 1000 event, it's easy to see why players are choosing to skip Doha. If you're going to show up to the Middle East swing, you might as well save your energy for the tournament that actually matters, the one with the bigger prize money and the more significant ranking points and the better competition. What makes this particularly painful for the Qatar Open organizers is that Sabalenka actually has history with their tournament. She debuted in Doha in 2020 and immediately claimed the title in spectacular fashion, announcing herself as a future star of the tour. That should create some loyalty or connection to the event. That should make her want to come back and defend her legacy there. But apparently, winning a tournament 6 years ago doesn't create enough obligation to show up when you're tired, heartbroken, and emotionally destroyed from a Grand Slam final loss. Sabalenka doesn't owe Qatar anything just because she won there once upon a time, especially when her body and mind are screaming at her to take a break. The tournament organizers have to be in full crisis mode right now. They built their entire marketing campaign around having the top players in women's tennis competing on their courts. They sold premium tickets to wealthy tennis fans in the region who wanted to see world-class athletes. They secured lucrative sponsorship deals based on the promise of marquee matchups and compelling storylines. And now, week by week, day by day, they've watched their draw get absolutely decimated by withdrawals. Their top seed is now Iga Swiatek, and she only got that position because literally everyone ranked above her in the tournament. Seeding pulled out. Their featured matches are now between players that most casual tennis fans have never heard of. The star power they were banking on has evaporated. From a fan perspective, this situation has to be incredibly frustrating. Imagine you're a tennis enthusiast living in Qatar or the broader Middle East region. The Qatar Open is one of the few chances you get each year to see world-class women's tennis live. You buy tickets months in advance, planning your schedule around the tournament, excited to see Sabalenka and Pegula and Osaka and all these incredible athletes compete at the highest level. Then, one by one, they all withdraw. Sabalenka needs rest. Pegula has an injury. Osaka is skipping the entire swing. Keys pulls out. Krejcikova can't make it. Suddenly, the tournament you paid good money to attend looks nothing like what was advertised. You're watching what feels more like a challenger event than a premier WTA competition. At what point do you start demanding a refund? At what point does the tournament lose credibility? But flip the perspective to the players themselves, particularly someone in Sabalenka's position, and the calculus looks completely different. She just experienced one of the most emotionally taxing moments of her professional career. She's exhausted in every possible way. If she forces herself to play in Qatar while still processing what happened in Melbourne, while still in that toxic headspace she described, she's almost certainly going to lose early anyway. She'll show up unprepared, get upset in the first or second round by someone ranked outside the top 50, lose ranking points she otherwise would have kept, and compound her mental struggles by adding another disappointing result to the pile. The smart play, the professional play, is to recognize when you're not ready and take the time you need to get right. This whole situation exposes a fundamental problem with how the WTA structures its calendar. There are simply too many mandatory and premier-level events crammed into too short a time frame. Players are expected to maintain peak performance for essentially 11 months out of the year. The off-season is barely long enough to heal from injuries, let alone take a meaningful mental break and recharge for another grueling year. The result is exactly what we're seeing in Qatar. Players are burned out, injured, and mentally exhausted, so they're forced to make strategic decisions about which tournaments matter and which ones they can afford to skip. The tournaments that end up getting sacrificed are the ones with unfortunate timing, lower prize money, or less prestige. Iga Swiatek stepping up as the new top seed in Doha is interesting from a competitive standpoint. She's the world number 2 and arguably the most dominant player on tour right now. With Sabalenka and half the other top players out of the draw, Swiatek's path to the title just opened up dramatically. She has to be looking at this situation thinking it's a golden opportunity to collect some easy ranking points and prize money against diminished competition. But even that victory would feel somewhat hollow, wouldn't it? Winning a tournament because everyone else withdrew isn't the same as beating them head to head and proving you're the best player in the field. Sure, you get the trophy and the points and the check, but there's always going to be an asterisk in people's minds. Oh yeah, Swiatek won Qatar, but Sabalenka and Pegula and Osaka weren't even there? The players who got bumped up from qualifying into the main draw should be thrilled, though. Athletes like Alexandra Eala, Daria Kasatkina, Kristina Buxa, and others are getting an unexpected opportunity to compete at a level they might not have reached on their own merit. This could be a career-defining moment for some of them. A deep run in a premier event, even one that's been depleted by withdrawals, can completely change your ranking, your confidence, and your entire trajectory as a professional tennis player. Suddenly, you're getting into bigger tournaments automatically. Suddenly, sponsors are interested in working with you. Suddenly, you're a name that tennis fans recognize. That's the silver lining to all this chaos. While the tournament loses its star power and prestige, it gains unpredictability. You might see some unknown player go on an inspired run and become the next big story in women's tennis. That's the beauty of sports. When the favorites don't show up, someone else gets their moment to shine. Sabalenka's stated plan is to rest and recover and then come back for the Dubai Championships. Dubai is a significantly bigger deal than Qatar in terms of prestige, prize money, and ranking points. It's a WTA 1000 event compared to Qatar's 500 level. So, strategically, it makes perfect sense to skip the smaller tournament and save your energy for the bigger one. She's not abandoning the Middle East swing entirely. She's not hiding from competition. She's just being selective and intelligent about where she invests her physical and mental resources. That's professional sports in 2025. You can't do everything, so you prioritize what matters most. The Dubai tournament is going to be absolutely stacked with talent because it's one of those events where the appearance fees and prize money are substantial enough that players show up even when they're tired, even when they're dealing with minor injuries, even when they'd rather be resting. That's the reality of professional tennis that fans don't always see. Money talks. If the payout is big enough, if the appearance fee makes it worth your while, suddenly everyone finds the energy and motivation to compete. If the financial incentives aren't there, well, maybe you need to take a few days to rest and recover and focus on your mental health. What this entire Qatar Open disaster really exposes is the fundamental disconnect between what fans want and what players need. Fans want to see the best players competing at every tournament, giving maximum effort, creating amazing matches and compelling storylines. Fans want their favorite athletes to show up and perform like superheroes every single week. Players, on the other hand, want to have long, healthy careers. They want to avoid injuries that could derail their prime years. They want to win the tournaments that actually matter for their legacy and their bank account. They want to make strategic decisions that maximize their earning potential while minimizing the physical and mental wear and tear on their bodies. Those two sets of desires don't always align, and when they conflict, the players are going to choose their own well-being every single time. The WTA needs to fundamentally rethink how it structures the calendar, or situations like Qatar are going to keep happening. Tournaments are going to keep getting gutted by withdrawals because players are exhausted and injured and mentally drained. The solution might be to spread events out more throughout the year, giving players actual recovery windows between tournaments. It might be to reduce the number of mandatory events so players have more flexibility in building their schedules. It might be to increase prize money across the board so even the smaller tournaments become attractive enough that players show up, regardless of how they're feeling. Whatever the solution is, the current system clearly isn't working. We're watching a Premier-level tournament fall apart in real time because the players it's supposed to showcase would rather be literally anywhere else. Until the WTA makes meaningful changes to address player burnout and schedule congestion, we're going to keep seeing exactly what's happening in Qatar. A tournament that should be exciting and competitive and full of star power turns into a shell of what it was supposed to be. Sabalenka's withdrawal is just the latest and most high-profile example, but it absolutely won't be the last. As long as the system is set up the way it currently is, with impossible expectations and inadequate rest periods and an 11-month grind, players are going to make strategic decisions about where to compete and where to rest. They're going to prioritize their health over tournament prestige. They're going to choose the events that matter most and skip the ones that don't. And tournaments like Qatar are going to pay the price. So there you have it. Aryna Sabalenka pulled out of the Qatar Open, along with approximately half of the other top players in women's tennis. And now the tournament has basically become a free-for-all for whoever actually bothered to show up. This isn't just about one player making a tough choice. This is about a systematic failure in how professional tennis operates. This is about a calendar that's unsustainable and a system that's burning out its biggest stars. This is about the inevitable collision between commercial interest and athlete well-being. And based on everything we're seeing right now, the athletes are choosing themselves, and honestly, can you blame them?